How does the way your company spends money change just before raising another round, and why?
I suppose the first answer is it shouldn't really. I mean, and actually, it probably doesn't really actually, because we've gone a very particular model where we've not taken VC, we've only taken angel money. I say only, I mean, that's still sizable money from key angels, but I would say it shouldn't. I mean, I'm sure probably businesses are quite careful about where they're grouping things, but from my point of view, absolutely not really. I mean, we're super cautious with every pound as a company because we strategically decided to raise in a certain way, and that's how I would be wanting my company to be run from a governance perspective.
So we're a consumer platform, and there are avenues through which we can quickly alter, or at least to some extent, revenue by altering the way we spend money. And like, I think fairly famously, anyone who's worked at like a large consumer platform coming up to a funding round will know that like they'll start to pump like spend on Facebook and Google search ahead of to try and hit some numbers. And do we do that? No.
I'm pleased to hear that.
Yeah. Because, well, I mean, to be fair, that's not a huge part of our business anyway. We're very focused on kind of B2B2C relationships, so partnerships, and organic search, which don't really have that relationship. I think rather than saying we're doing a raise at this point, so this is how we have to spend, we would say this is how we're spending, so where does it make sense to raise?
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. What does the path to a self-sustaining, profitable company look like for founders today?
When I was at university, I studied economics, and I felt that there was this pressure to go and take prestigious careers, right? So that conventionally is go work in finance, go work in consulting, and to the extent that actually, I remember I had an internship to work at a great startup, or an internship offer to work at a great startup many years ago. This was at Go Cardless, like before it was like a big thing, directly from the founders because they came and did a talk because they were alumni of Oxford. And I went afterwards and was like, oh, I love what you're doing, can I do an internship? And I ended up doing an internship in banking because I was like, oh, that's what people do, right?
And then you hated it.
And I hated it.
Yeah.
So I remember specifically not wanting to do that. But I think the thing that I've kind of seen over the past couple years, and there's some backlash now with the time with Uber and WeWork and stuff, is that like there's a prestige trap in being an entrepreneur around fundraising. And I think the best quote that I have is from actually one of our own investors, who kind of reminded us that venture funding is the worst financing possible. It is funding you take because you have absolutely no choice. It is like it's the only way to get the finance you need to run your business. That's why sustainable businesses raise debt instead, or have other means. So I think in order to run a sustainable business, you actually the most important thing is as an individual, you need to think to yourself, are you willing to avoid that prestige trap?
There's been a lot of pressure, hasn't there, and romanticism around that kind of hockey stick curve and billion-dollar exits, and I've had this debate on and off with a few entrepreneurs over the years, and I think my sort of end philosophy on it really is it's a brilliant romantic vision for us all to know what we can do, and so it gives you that huge sort of ambition surge. But equally, ultimately, we've all got to be selling, whether it's tech, whether it's wine bottles, whatever it is. And there's that constant push-pull, I think. Having been on one side of the fundraising cycle, how do you show up differently as an investor?
I think it's quite weird. I saw a study, and it was something like 80% of investors in Europe are like ex-banking, ex-consulting, whereas in the US it's like 80% are ex-founders. So I think it's interesting that there is that kind of difference. I think I would probably personally be able to be more understanding with founders, having been one, because that was my own finding with the investors who have been founders. I think it can be sometimes hard to deal with people who, you show an Excel sheet, and when reality doesn't happen like the Excel sheet, they're like, but you promised the Excel sheet. Whereas, actual founders understand that like the Excel sheet is an attempt, a very like loose attempt to try and model your thoughts, not a guarantee. So maybe a bit more understanding, more patient.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that founder point is an interesting one, because I've not, actually my key, I'm just trying to think, So I've had first-time investors. I've got my closest investor who is also an entrepreneur, which is incredible. And actually, thinking about the landscape, you're right. The founders, it's a whole different ballgame, actually, isn't it? I always think the irony of that situation is, if the investor actually wants to get more understanding as to the business, the more formal and kind of competent they are to start with, it's completely counterintuitive, actually.
Yeah.
So I would say to any investors, if you really want to understand a business in a short space of time in your boardroom, soften up a little.
Yeah.
Make your entrepreneur feel welcome. Just kind of shake it out a bit before they come in, because I think it doesn't really allow anyone to put their best foot forward necessarily, that whole kind of tension in the room. What should founders think about before going to investors? Well, while you're finishing your mouthful, I've probably got one. I think that...
I'm going to go for another mouthful then.
Yeah, we're often, as entrepreneurs, complaining about investors. It's somebody's, their hard-earned cash, whatever stage they're at, however wealthy they are, however that big their fund is. And I often think we as entrepreneurs can be a little flippant and a little arrogant and a little, of course, because we're visionary and we know it's a freaking good idea, otherwise we wouldn't be selling our soul to do it. But I do think that also we all should be showing a huge amount of respect for them to taking the meeting in the first place. So I think, that preparedness, that kind of piece, which is what actually do they want to hear from me? Yeah, they want a little bit on the vision, but that's not really their primary purpose. They're going to want my person who's digging right into the numbers. If that's not me, they're going to want to know that, how we're going to grow it. It's almost like you need to prep the hell out of each angle and think you're lucky to get the hour. It's normally a tight hour. You've got to run that tight hour to make sure you put your best foot forward.
For a lot of founders and entrepreneurs in general, it's often kind of difficult to accept the flaws that exist in your business. And no business is perfect. Every business has flaws. Yeah, I mean, except obviously for our business. Our businesses are perfect. Yeah. But everyone else should be conscious. Every business has problems. And it can kind of be hard to sometimes think about them. And some of them can be really frustrating things about competitors and stuff. Maybe someone's doing something that's not fair or whatever, but that's the market. So I think be prepared before someone asks you those questions. Give some thought. Be real with yourself. No business is perfect. What are the things that someone is going to ask? Because sometimes you can kind of be in denial, but when they come and ask those questions, it's not out of nowhere. That you should have foreseen and thought about. So be prepared to answer the difficult questions. And to the extent that you're not, maybe you genuinely miss these questions, the advice that we always have been given and that we give everyone else is, think of your fundraising as a sales process. Create a list of the people you want to talk to and put it in reverse priority order. Talk to the worst people first, or not worst, but the people who either aren't your dream investor or aren't necessarily a great fit, but could potentially invest. Talk to them first, and listen to what they say, because like you say, whether you're a professional venture investor or you're investing your personal cash from being an entrepreneur or just being in business, you should still give everyone the due respect of listening to what they say. And often those meetings will kind of make clear the themes that will come up in the meetings you care about.
I think that's a really good point.
What, if any, accountability measures does your company have in place to keep spending on track?
We monitor our cash flow very seriously, so as the CEO, I've got a super firm handle on that. So it doesn't actually affect us greatly in the sense that we have a very rigorous system. I could see, hypothetically, in a much bigger company, because our company, we don't need a huge team. We're all operating from London. Any of the international deals are run out of London. We haven't got multiple offices. I'm speaking from a very personal sort of situation where it's super robust and super easy to keep track of. So if one sort of strange payment went out for even, I suppose, £100, I would very quickly notice myself, because I'm authorising everything. I could appreciate that in a different company with a different model, that may well be a very different situation. So perhaps, do you have a slightly more complicated?
I guess as founders, we kind of don't need an accountability mechanism because, you know, when we set budgets and stuff, that's not you know, punitive. That's, you know, what we're trying to achieve. And, you know, if we're like, okay, we're falling behind, we need to think about how we reset things. Like the accountability is that the business is going to fail and all of the effort we've made is going to be for nothing. Within the company, I guess the simple thing is just that we set budgets and just review whether, well, the rule that we have is that if you're going to spend over budget, that can be okay. Just make a written case for why you're doing that and send it to us. And as long as, you know...
So we have it that they have to pitch to me, and if I say yes, I say yes.
Exactly. Which actually makes it sound way more formal than it is. It's more often than not someone going, hey, can I do this thing? And it's like, that does make sense. We should do that thing. In your opinion, what is easier? Raising the money or knowing how to spend for growth?
Raising it, I think. I don't really see any... We're not a company that cash burns a lot. We have sometimes virtually no marketing budget. We do it all virally. So I would say the raise that takes up the time in terms of, I mean, as a founder, you're always to some extent prepping for your next raise. So we don't have any problems as a business knowing exactly where we need to spend it. I think that's actually a strange question for me.
Which is easier? I guess it's easier to work out how to spend it. But I think it's totally non-trivial. Like, I think particularly as you kind of...
I mean, we've got decisions to make, right? So you might have, are we going that direction? Are we going the other? I mean, as a founder though, we usually know our vision, don't we? It doesn't mean we're not making mistakes, but by that point we made the mistake, we've gone another track and we pivoted. So I mean, it's a strange thing, isn't it? Yeah,
but for us, right, and as like a tech business and a platform business, there is a lot of ways that you can spend money, and there's tons of data.
And a lot of ways you can waste money.
Yes, yeah. Well, and case in point, the biggest way that people waste money is paid search.
You're talking about organic search, and we've built everything on that. Everything.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's kind of fickle. So I mean, if the entire fundraising model, or at least VC model is, you show them that you have a machine that can turn X into some multiple of X that's more than one. And actually, it's a non-trivial task working out what the operational model for achieving that is.
Yeah, so it's different. I've got a company with bottles as opposed to, we've got a tech element, but...
Yeah, so working out like, okay, are we going to invest in hiring developers to improve the conversion rate within the product? Or are we going to spend more on paid search?
Actually, we've got a subscription now, so these are relevant questions.
And tons of what's it, and then trying to deal, there's so much data to gather and analyze and...
But would you say that's tougher than the fundraising bit?
I think it really depends. It depends on your fundraise. I ultimately, I guess I'm kind of taking the second thing to mean like, what is easier, raising money or executing? And actually executing, they're totally non-independent.
No, exactly.
If you execute really well, it's going to be easier to raise money.
Nothing's easy about running a business, really.
Yeah.
What would it take you to feel happy about money? For me, it would be a very altruistic answer, which is to have shifted my industry, to be giving back, to really leave this complicated world a better place than I found it in. And for me, money is that facilitator. How can I help other people? How can we, when we reach the end of our lives, how can we feel like we actually made a difference? That for me is the power and beauty of money as a driving force.
Similar to what you said, I hope that a lot of entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs because, or at least are, I'm going to rephrase that. I think most successful entrepreneurs don't do it to make money. Money is a byproduct.
Exactly.
Because I mean, if you think about modern capitalist societies, the idea should be that money is a reward for adding value. Right. That's how a healthy capitalist society should function. The problem is that the modern zeitgeist doesn't agree with that fairly, because we, instead of having companies that focus on adding value, have your banker friends whose primary purpose is making money. And the thing is, actually, in order to make money, you can either add value or you can extract value from other people. right? So entrepreneurs are here in the real world, adding value, and then taking a small share in order to fund ourselves, but ideally a fair cut. So I mean, that kind of extractive stuff is what we call rent seeking, and that's really when you think about. If you think about the financial industry, I think there was an interesting stat from an economist that was like 90% of financial activity within the financial industry is actually activity that is itself within the financial industry.
Right,
Only
wow.
10% actually affects actual activity, like real activity in the economy. And if you think about most of the financial markets, it's secondary markets, right? Like if someone is in the primary market, i.e. investing in your company, they are helping something real come into the world. If someone's in the secondary market, they're gambling. The thing that annoys me most is when people talk about equity investing on the secondary market, not the primary market, where you're also not going to take an active part in corporate governance, as if it's anything different to betting on sports. As if because you have a model, it's some sort of well, I mean, it's mathematically interesting, but it's not like really adding value. It's redistributing value, and at the very best, you're redistributing value from people who can't afford the advice to people who can afford the advice.
Yeah. I got an email the other day from a potential American client in a state we weren't selling in yet, and she's literally like, "Oh my God, but you're Amanda, you're the founder. What are you doing answering my email?" I'm like,
exactly.
I care the most about every single one of my customers. I like nothing more.
That's how you know you're adding value. There's no better feeling than someone actually saying, "I have used or consumed your product and I love it."